Hey everyone. Today I wanted to talk about all the times I took mescaline. Um, so I each time I took it, every time I took it in the form of the powdered bark of the Peruvian torch cactus. And let me tell you, this stuff tastes awful. It's really bitter. It's really sour. It doesn't go down well. I tried to mix it with hummus and it just made it thicker. The taste was kind of the same. It overpowered the hummus. So the first time I took like 10 grams at a time, and I took it at like 4 hours between like 10 grams, 10 grams, 10 grams, and 3, 4 hours in between each. And I watched Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And I remember thinking the story made more sense than usual, like one scene led into the other with more meaning. Um, okay, so I took it that time. Then I took it another time, and I was uh, going to my dad's cottage. And on the way there, I noticed that, like, as it was coming on, I took about 30 grams as it was all at once. And as it was coming on, I remember thinking that the air looked kind of like pure or crystalline. Um, I remember feeling like I could see a deeper part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Like, for example, I was looking at a tree and it had this aura that it was radiating, and then all the trees had this aura that were connecting these auras that were connecting to each other. Like the aura itself was like a full circle rainbow, and so it's like I was able to see all the shades of color transparently, like through the air, as if they were rainbows, but they were auras, and they were connecting the trees to each other. Um, and when I got to the cottage, um, I was inside, and the wall has this pattern that's sort of like just like all these lines everywhere, all these curvy lines, and I could see the negative space create patterns. So I was seeing a pattern that I'd never seen before. It was like the negative space where instead of the black lines, there were the empty white spaces. They themselves were like patterns on the wall, and there was this like upwards like vibe. Um, I remember thinking of the Six Flags logo with like those little colored flags. Everything was kind of like that, and I remember looking at the stove, and there was the fire coming from like underneath, and it looked like a flower. Um, this other time, I took mescaline, about 35 grams or so of the powdered bark, and my friend dropped me off at a place called the Evergreen Brickworks. I think back then it was called the Don Valley Brickworks. It's this beautiful place, nice trees, nice greenery. Um, I remember feeling like there was this subtle sense of like everything, like a person I passed by while I was on my way there was like in this subtle way really large. Like something in my vision was making everything really large, but in a really subtle way. And let's see what happened there. I walked around the Don Valley Brickworks, and I became paranoid. So I lied down on a bench, and I just closed my eyes and sat there for like an hour. And so I looked at the ground, the stone ground, and I remember seeing a court jester. Um, I don't remember what it was doing, but there was like this court jester pattern in the ground. And I remember looking at the hill, and there were trees above, and I felt like I could see through the hill, and I could see the roots inside the ground, the roots of the tree. Um, and then I walked back along the Mud Creek path um, back to civilization, and that took like between half an hour and an hour. And I remember this really cool feeling. I was looking at this water that was like rolling down rocks. It was coming down the rocks, and as I was looking at this stream, um, it's like the water suddenly became smoother and more flowing, and everything suddenly got like, you know, that feeling you get at the beginning of a psychedelic trip where like everything starts to shift and it's like hearing this ambient tone just and it starts and everything gets more distant and bigger and your vision gets more clear and suddenly like there's like movement in your vision. I was starting to get that as the water became smoother. It's like everything became smoother. And I remember like pulling the branches and letting them go, these branches from trees, and I was seeing them as a sort of instrument. And I was like plucking these branches and they were creating sound. And one of the branches I plucked created these waves of sound that emanated from it, and it reached me, and it was like I could see the sound in the air. Um, and I remember walking along this trail and looking at my pockets and being like, damn, there's a lot of space, three-dimensional space. And looking at underneath the bridge, and it looked like amplified, like the perspective was like wider. And towards the end of my walk through Mud Creek, I looked at the trees and they were starting to shift, and they were like they had this upwards buzz to them, like these twinkling spots around their contours, and those spots were like rising. And I remember thinking, all these trees are forming this circus-like vibe, and they were all like shifting about and like moving and juxtaposing or whatever. Like they were all like moving to different spots, and I realized they were moving towards these three colored areas. And one area was like red, the other one was green, the other one was blue or yellow, and the trees had like these colors associated with them, and they were moving to their greens, their blues, their reds, you know, all moving wherever they were. They were just like shifting. And let's see. I remember being back on the street, and I was paranoid because there was a cop there. So I remember looking towards the cop, and there was a light shining at me, and the light had this like lens flare effect, where I could see like the rays of light creating these shining spots, like a lens flare basically. Um, and also that time I went to the cottage, I remember losing my sense of language a little bit. Like it was more difficult to speak English, and on my way home, I put my toque like above. I put it over my eyes, and I started crying because I realized, like at the time, I had been smoking a lot of weed and drinking alcohol, and this had been going on for like half a year to a year. And I started crying because I noticed how I was just making the world around me fake. You know, my world was becoming fake from all these drugs I was taking, and I was crying. It was like I was killing reality, and I was killing myself through that. And so I started crying and realizing, like, you know, this feeling of like now being in real reality. You know, I was in reality, and I was thinking of like my past and future and how it all seemed kind of fake by comparison. And I remember as my sense of language decomposed, it gave way to this sense of like the framework of language. Like instead of just being English, it was the framework of language, where like what English was built upon was what I was seeing. Um, so this brings me to one of the last times I tried mescaline, a horror story. Um, so I had tried about 40 grams this last time, and I had this strain of weed with me called Pink Kush, 30% sativa, 70% indica, and I smoked a bowl of it as the mescaline was coming on. And I remember like going up to my mom's room, and my mom looked a bit like a demon. It was like this mythological demon. Like she had this glow around her that looked kind of like a demon's glow, and I started to see all of these symbols, and it was like this cartoony, mystical, fire-like look to them. You know, there was like this look of these symbols were like, there was this, how do I put it, like this buzz, this upward, like fiery, mystical buzz. Like all the symbols were like their edges were like rising with fire. And I came downstairs, I smoked another bowl, and I just sat here on this couch looking at the door over there, and I was like blasting through space. I remember this feeling of blasting, and suddenly it became too intense, and when I moved, it made this weird rugged sound, and I started to feel like I was really in this gray prison cell, and all the senses I'd known, all the stimuli that I'd felt were like fake add-ons, and like I was being fed information and sensory information through this gray prison cell that I didn't know existed. It was like I was flying over this minefield, or like hovering over this minefield, and suddenly I was in this gray prison cell, and my whole life had been a hallucination. And I looked at the door, and it looked like this prison cell police state door. Like it, like instead of being normal, it like bent this way, and the parts here and here were like bzzz, and there was this electrical buzz that was like bending the doors and making them crooked and out of shape. And as I moved, I was creating this like crooked, weird, rugged sound, and I started to cry. I started to cry from fear. I just wanted it to end. It was like this over energized feeling, and I remember how raw the crying was, this raw sense of wanting it to end. My goodness. And let's see. So that lasted for a while. Then I finally started to come down. And I don't think I took mescaline after that. If I did, it was a tiny dose because I was scared of it at the time. But the most beautiful part was that time I was riding to my dad's cottage. There was like this crystalline, rainbowy look to everything. And it was like this, like looking at things through this lens of like beauty. It's hard to describe, but it kind of makes me wish I would have explored deeper with the mescaline. You know, tried maybe 50, 60 grams, because it was beautiful. But then I couldn't buy any more. So I stopped using it, and I haven't tried it since then. So anyway, that was my story about mescaline. I hope you liked it. I described all of what I went through. All right, peace out.